This is a film about money. But unlike those other ones, we dive into the fabric of an ancient game that we're all playing and explore the universal roots of a monster we've all fed that is now feeding on everything. We're at that point in the human saga where the game, the player, and the whole planet are in for a cold, dark winter. But before we go there, let's just start with the easiest question, I think. What is money? Store of value.
Yeah, I know what it is, believe me.
Yeah.
So what is money?
Usually when people define money, they tell you what it does. That it's a medium of exchange, a store of value, a unit of account. But they don't tell you what money is.
The Dow Jones falling 600
more
points.
negative than I think a lot were expecting.
Money is a feeling of security, that I have some money in the bank for people that have enough.
Money is really a mental, emotional construct.
Money is an agreement. Money is a story.
My dad had an expression. He said, "Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget. I'll tell you what you value."
What is value? And how does money store it?
There are fears that the dollar will be marked down.
What is money? It's a kind of game.
Money is a symbol of status and social hierarchy. Billionaires have very high status in our society, where poor people that are homeless don't have a lot of status.
How's this game working out for the people?
Mostly, money is a claim on energy and resources.
How's the game working out for our planet? And is it time for a new game of money?
How we create money is also, in large part, how we create society.
Occupy the Fed mentioned me in their latest blog. They're talking about our upcoming demonstrations in November. It's dope. We strongly encourage everyone who engages in any in-person protest to be 100% peaceful, lawful, orderly, respectful. We denounce violence in all forms, both physical, verbal hate speech. Absolutely do not support anything of the sort. Most important thing right now is education and getting the word out peacefully. This is what will win out in the long run. The Fed Wall Street establishment is so corrupt to its core that we just need to expose it, and the entire sentiment will turn and demand change. Occupy the Fed.
This is Harrison Schultz. To him, money represents slavery, made possible by a rule in this game called debt, in which Harrison is drowning.
Debt is what extracts the value out of life. Debt is death. All this entertainment, it's all to convince ourselves that we're not debt slaves, but we are. It's only, all you can do is temporarily distract yourself from this fact for a moment. And that distraction is still a commodified distraction that they're still profiting off of.
Harrison believes central banks are to blame for this slave game. And we'll get there. But first, let's start from the beginning. Money, money, money. There are three origins of money: the sacred, social, and commercial. The sacred were items used to influence the supernatural, like a talisman or psychedelic plant. The social items in ceremony were given group value and could be traded among the tribe. Commerce began with the trade of daily needs, but this took inconvenient amounts of guesswork to determine the value of each item, thus exposing humanity's need for a standard unit of human value. Today, money lives inside and is traded through computers. From seeds and cattle to circuits and wires, money has come a long way.
When you try to pin down money in anything material, it isn't money anymore. On a material level, it's just bits and computers. It's the interpretation of those symbols that make something into money. And that interpretation is a product of human agreement.
Something major happened in our history around 10,000 years ago. Modern Homo sapiens, as a biologically evolved organism, is around 300,000 years old. Before that, there were other pre-human hominids. And 10,000 years ago, we started to develop agriculture, and we stayed in one place instead of roaming and hunting and gathering. And what this did is it changed our ideas of what was wealth, and we started to amass surplus.
The original cattle and sheep were pretty wild, but eventually humans started to follow the herds and then to protect and take care of the herds and eventually to own the herds. Making nature ours really is what domestication is. Hunter-gatherers related to Earth as a being, but as the economy and system of technology and agriculture made more and more into resources, we began to see it as something for us to use.
The original moneylenders traded by the bushel, the animal, or slave. The invention of the iron plow made previously barren land into surplus-generating farms. Grain storage became banks. Trade became the business sector, and groups of power became governments, and all of them developed into what we now call our economy.
So for the first 5,000 years of human civilization, probably 100,000 years of human evolutionary development, every day we had to go and eat and kill. It was very difficult to store food. But through this market process of people acting and interacting, eventually a producer came online that figured out, hey, we can create this heat pump that pulls entropy out of this box we call the refrigerator, and all of a sudden food lasts for months, where it used to only last for days. So now the individual consumer doesn't need to spend so much time like scrounging for food on a day-to-day basis, right? That problem is solved for months at a time. You can go and solve other more difficult, complicated problems, basically. So it's the economic process that enables this elevation in our standard of living.
On one level, economics simply means the ways that we take care of each other materially, the ways in which we coordinate our labor toward a common purpose.
Take immediate and resolute action.
A more narrow conception of economics is simply the things that we do for money, the goods and services that are exchanged for money. Right now we are awash in a world of cheapness. When all of our utensils, all of our objects, even our houses, are made to minimize cost and maximize something measurable, like square feet of floor space. That's cheapness built into the entire built environment. And it is oppressive. Like, we yearn for things that are not mass-produced, but made for us by somebody who knows us. Like, there's a kind of a wealth in that. When we lack that type of nourishment in compensation for it, we develop a insatiable craving for more and more stuff.
The average U.S. home has 300,000 products, the biggest of which is the house itself. 25% of houses with two-car garages don't have room to park inside them. Storage locations saw the fastest commercial real estate boom over the past 40 years. We own way more products than we can fit inside houses that have tripled in size over the past 50 years. As our nomadic ancestors settled and accumulated a wealth of surplus that humanity never experienced before, a creature was born, singing a song of growth and debt.
You can't understand the commodification of nature without understanding debt. Debt is what commodifies nature. Debt is what turns nature into money.
Debt came from the lending of seeds and cattle, which would reproduce abundantly, so some of that abundance went back to the lender. But after temple priesthoods made metals into money, and by the time Rome came around, debt became repayable only in coins, which were not abundant and could not reproduce. At this point in history, the game of money gave birth to a monster that would come to swallow entire ecosystems.
The emergent phenomenon of everyone following their self-interest in order to generate monetary profits is this blind, energy-hungry superorganism. It doesn't care about human well-being. It doesn't care about the environment. It cares about one thing, growth, and that growth requires energy. It's beyond the ability of any one human or group of humans to change.
If the economy is the super socioeconomic organism, I think money would be the lifeblood.
My name is Jason Picard. I had a career as a top trader at a hedge fund on Wall Street. I worked for Paul Tudor Jones, one of the greatest investors of all time. And I was a weather trader, so I used meteorology and I worked with the meteorologist on trying to figure out how the weather impacted various commodity markets. We go back and look at historical weather patterns, how jet streams and ocean temperatures are setting up around the world, and then we'd see what came next. So if we know that 4 times in 1963, in 2015, in such and such years, that the pattern all looked like this, and then 4 out of 5 times it went from warmer to cooler than normal, we'd use that information and say, okay, we have a 4 out of 5 chance of being right. In 1963 of November, that was the year that Kennedy was shot. And November of 2016 was the year that Trump got elected. The whole world was paying attention and the whole world was emotional about it. And so both of those months had extremely warm Novembers and then an extremely cold December that followed. When I realized that there was also this synergy, this correlation to an emotional state, that gave me more confidence in the trade, and lo and behold, December of 2016 was extremely cold.
My name is Ed Dowd, and I'm a Wall Street careerist. Early on in my career, I learned how to basically interpret the capital markets and how the guts of the system really worked. And then I immediately went to Wall Street, and I saw the dot-com fraud, and I saw how that unfolded. Then I went to a firm called Independence Investments where I became a technology analyst, and I made some good calls because of the fraud that I saw going on Wall Street, and I parlayed that job into an equity portfolio management role at BlackRock. We inherited a $2 billion large cap growth fund, and over 10 years at BlackRock I grew it to $10 billion. The thing to understand about the capital markets, money, capital has a life of its own. It's a force of nature, like gravity, like the oceans. It flows where it wants to flow. As above, so below. The capital markets are like anything on the planet. There's cycles to them and they have their own rhythm. And I just love the fact that it's bigger than any one person, and you kind of have to be a surfer, surf the waves.
A lot of people think that the stock market is just this collection of numbers and data, right? But it's actually a collection of beings. It's the collective emotion and psychological state of all the participants. The market has a psychology. It's actually alive.
This living market, the organism of human desires and demands, has a scoreboard. What started as clay pots with etchings of account turned into exchange listings. But to the vast majority, these numbers represent a divided game board with 2 distinct teams.
So, Debt, the First 5,000 Years by OWS founder David Graeber. I ran into him a bunch of times. I went to all the Strike Debt launches, the Jubilee launches that he did. This book probably should be renamed Debt, the First 5,000 Years of Rape Culture.
Harrison went to the University of Wisconsin, receiving a PhD in sociology. He is now $300,000 in student loan debt.
The story that we hear about capoeira, the slave, when they'd be ready to run away, they get to the plantation, they would find a patch of capoeira. Capoeira, it's an Indian word from native indigenous Brazilian tribes. It means grass. It's a kind of soft grass that you get in forests after you cut down a tree. When the slave would be working, the overseer would look the other way. Maybe they'd shrug off work, they'd go to their spot where they hang out, they'd go to their capoeira patch. They'd start working out, start, balança, start working some kicks. Everyone in Brazil that I met who practiced capoeira, pretty much everyone has used it in active self-defense situations in Brazil. This isn't like some old thing. I mean, people are still using it to survive slavery.
The amazing thing to me was, and he's 39 years old, he's exactly like he was when he was 3. And so he's like 5, I don't know. He's with his grandmother in the elevator, and a woman comes into the elevator apparently, and maybe she's half canned up, and she's bending over. Oh, hello there, you darling little boy. And so he starts to go out. He's going out of his mind. Of course, he can't take that, and he says,
"No." He turned to me and he said, "Get me out of here."
So the point is, so that thing of his personality, that's absolutely true today. He doesn't take fools easily, It's annoyed quickly.
Yeah.
The slaves would play, or they would dance samba, and samba and capoeira just go hand in hand. So, I mean, they would play the capoeira in front of these slave masters, when they were working them too hard as a threat to tell them to back off.
Oh, shit, behind! Look behind, look behind!
In 2011, thousands of people gathered in New York City to protest an unfair game of money.
I wanted to be down there on the streets. I was living in Lower Manhattan, and I could literally hear the protest out my window.
Occupy Wall Street was the apocalypse for me.
They're letting people out, single file!
Speaking for your own economic future. That seems to be what's at the core of this.
It's revolution, not reform.
I was angry too, but at the same time, paradoxically, I was on the side that they were marching against.
If you want to get out, go that way!
That's when the cracks in the matrix started to show. I didn't know what I was doing when Occupy started. So I didn't know what I wanted out of this. I didn't think Occupy would be successful at all. Next thing I know, I'm on Fox, I'm on MSNBC, and I'm like, what is going on?
I won't answer that question because I think it completely distracts from economic injustice.
Its biggest problem was lack of organization.
So they can make money off of your taxes.
Occupy, Team Yin. Billionaires, Team Yang.
I used to manage money for billionaires on Wall Street until I kind of quit and saw the light. They put their pants on the same way that we do every day. They're just following the rules, getting the same evolutionary neurotransmitters, trying to match the same emotional states of our ancestors as I am.
So, I mean, I was just so enthusiastic, I didn't even stop to think about what it was I was trying to change. During Occupy Wall Street, the Ron Paul movement was really popping, and I mean, a lot of them came down to OWS and they were talking about the Federal Reserve and they wanted to talk about it. And I was like, no, we got to talk about capitalism. Like, what's the Fed? That's when I first began to learn about the Fed specifically, and that the Fed was the Reserve Bank of Wall Street.
The beast was created in 1913 with the advent of the Federal Reserve System, and it needs constant credit creation. It needs to be fed.
Every game needs a referee to issue money fairly and prevent panic among the players. Enter the Federal Reserve banking system.
The money panic of 1907.
My customers can't pay their bills, well, I gotta let them have groceries. They gotta eat.
For the Federal Reserve, banks had to keep their own reserves. And if there were a crisis of confidence in that bank, a run on the bank, then everybody would lose their money. And that would spread as a contagion.
Do you mean to sit there and tell me that in this man's country, there's nothing we can do about a mess like this we're in?
Sure, John, sure. There's something we can do about it. Some sort of a central or reserve banking system where a bank like mine can always get reserve dollars when they need them.
So the idea was, okay, let's have the banks put their reserves in a larger institution. If there's a run on that bank, then extra reserves can be lent to that bank.
The 1800s were plagued with money panics. The global game needed a referee. And in 1913, we got one.
A bank which will issue currency. Yes, Glass, your bill really seems to go to the heart of the problem.
16 short years after the birth of the Federal Reserve, the Roaring Twenties gave way to the Great Depression. 100 years later, following the great financial crisis, people took to the streets to protest the whole idea of the game.
So the ultimate downfall of Occupy Wall Street was its monetary illiteracy. It's the fact Occupy Wall Street didn't know enough about Wall Street. The thing that I learned from Occupy is that the Fed is the real target. The Fed is where we should have been occupying.
Technically, the referee has to abide by rules. When it started, the Fed needed gold reserves. That ended 20 years later. Money printing then became an easier habit of which the ref would soon become addicted, and so began the great devaluation of the US dollar.
Money is a unit of account. It is a medium of exchange, and it's a store of value.
Money is used as a standard for measuring other values. Then it became a storehouse of value.
Most of our money has two of them. Okay, it's a unit of account, and it is a medium of exchange. The store of value is the problem for all currencies, because all currencies devalue over time.
One of the easiest ways to compromise a money's store of value function is to compromise its supply integrity.
The Federal Reserve's job is to maintain the stability of the dollar.
Spoiler alert, since the Fed's inception in 1913, the US dollar has lost 96% of its purchasing power as the world reserve currency.
Over the last 550 years, there have been 6 major global reserve currencies: Portugal, Spain, Netherlands, France, Great Britain, United States. And each of those currencies have lasted an average of 92 years. And for the last 90 years, we've been the global reserve currency.
The Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944 declared the game of money global, and everyone must use the dollar. This was also the year the U.S. had a lot of gold.
In country after country, gold coins and currency became the traditional medium of exchange.
Every country in this game of money could rest easy knowing that the US dollar would not devalue, for it was backed by the strongest and longest lasting store of value in the civilized world: gold.
In the years after World War II, the United States accumulates more than $30 billion in gold.
Everyone else would peg their currencies to the dollar, and anyone who ever had a problem with that, don't worry, we won't print too much money, because you can always say, I'll take the gold instead of hold the dollar. That was the deal. And from 1955 to 1971, our coffers of gold went from 20,000 tons down to 8,800 tons as countries said, we'd rather have our gold. As we went into the war in Vietnam and the expansionary policies of the 1960s, we started expanding the money supply, and our gold holdings were coming down. It was a $500 100% increase in the money supply relative to gold. What's happening right now over the last 15 years is the exact same situation. What does that do? Well, it punishes other countries who are accepting the dollar.
So the ref's money printing habits started hurting all other teams. The game of money was not only increasingly unfair, but global. And then, in 1971, Tricky Dicky changed the game forever.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily
It was permanent.
the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets. What does it mean for you?
For you, it means that money in your pocket, or more likely your computer, is backed not by gold, not by reserve assets anymore, but by a promise from the government. You know, where the gold promise used to be. But don't get too bent out of shape. By the 1800s, the game of money already developed fractional reserve lending, allowing banks to lend 9 out of every $10 that you deposited for their profiteering. Fiat is simply the final stage of this game.
Fractional reserve making is fraud to the extent that it's not disclosed and agreed upon in a bilateral transaction. You signed a contract with me to put gold on deposit, 100% redeemable at any time, on demand by you. That's kind of the initial kernel for the fraud that is ultimately zero reserve currency, which is fiat currency, right? It is money backed by the anticipated future cash flows of taxpayers, right? That this entity called the state will remain a going concern and continue to be able to coerce me to extract taxes from me. That's what it's backed by. It's backed by the threat of coercion, compulsion, and violence, right? Try not paying your taxes for 10 years if you don't believe me.
As the dollar became fiat, the whole world felt the effects of Nixon's decision. The game was rapidly changing rules in order to siphon value from the dollar at the expense of every other nation.
You now come to 1971, Nixon closes the gold window, and the Saudis say, The oil crisis that happened in the 1970s happened because they said, wait a second, if we can't take your gold and you're going to devalue the dollar, okay, you devalue the dollar by 50%, we'll double the oil price. You devalue the dollar another 50%, we'll double the oil price again. And so while we labeled the Saudis these evil, group, that was the story we told America why this oil crisis was happening, the reality is we closed the gold window and we were devaluing the dollar.
Action has to be taken to stem the drain on the dollar. In time, history will measure its failure or success, and whether the dollar will continue to be, as it has been, good as gold.
Everybody's scared, Ralph. That's what it is. Nobody trusts anybody anymore.
In the game of money, value has been stored in grain, gold, paper, and now, oil. So let's look at this economic wonder's influence on the scoreboard.
Energy is the currency of life. Animals, when they chase prey, they get a return in calories. And they also have an expense in calories. And those animals that had an outside return for their investment had evolutionary payoffs. So this evolutionary payoff of having a high energy surplus also applies to human systems. In our modern system, we turbocharged our economies by mining ancient sunlight. This stuff is so powerful. A barrel of oil does the same amount of work as I would working outside for 5 years. We pay $100 for it.
Imagine paying a worker $100 after working for 5 years. And consistently good work if we're talking about oil's performance. No wonder we built the entire game around it and hunted every last drop.
I couldn't imagine how this ever-increasing supply of oil was achieved. until I found out that there's not just one, but thousands of oil companies, all competing with each other to discover and develop new sources of oil.
We've self-organized an economic system based on quarterly and yearly growth, measured by profits. The profits are 99% linked to this incredibly powerful energy. It's really a bank account that we're drawing down every year. So our GDP, which is a measure of gross domestic product, or if you add it all up for the world, it would be GWP, gross world product. In effect, we could relabel that GWB, where the B stands for burning, because every single good and service in the global economy that contributes to GWP required energy to develop, to mine, to combine, to create, to deliver, to maintain, to service, to repair, to dispose of. Everything we spend money on started somewhere with a small fire. And so money gives us security, status, comfort, dopamine, and it draws down on natural systems at the same time.
Now let that sink in. Our economy demands finite resources from the earth to grow for the sake of growth.
1 barrel of oil is 5 years of my work. The human economic system every year uses 100 billion barrels of oil worth of coal, oil, and natural gas. The growth of the last 2 centuries is an anomaly. We grew from the year 1500 to the year 1800 at maybe 0.5% a year, which was huge growth. From 1940 to 1970, we grew at 5% a year. So growth peaked in the 1970s, which is when oil production peaked. We are still growing, but we're growing at a much smaller amount. And that growth is due to really exaggerated measures by central banks and governments and debt and things like that. It's not sustainable.
The financial wizardry used to artificially grow our economies isn't all that's unsustainable. Land species have declined by 20% since 1900. In the past 30 years, roughly 420 million hectares of forest have been lost from human activity like agriculture and logging. Energy consumption has reached unforeseeable heights as the average person helps steer this superorganism forward, but for the money game to keep going, for the superorganism to keep growing, nature incurs an ominous debt.
When we bring something into the realm of products, into the realm of goods and services that had been just something in nature, when we convert a forest into board feet, for example, then you can make money that way.
When money comes into existence from a commercial bank, the banking system itself is in stability. There's an asset and a liability. But when new money comes in, the same amount of coal, oil, trees, elephants, copper, fossil water aquifers exist as before the money came in existence.
What do the heroes do in ancient myths? They slay the beasts. And sometimes, I think in Gilgamesh actually, like he literally cuts down the forests, and makes fields. Like that, this movement of civilization is very ancient. It wasn't a mistake per se. It was an evolutionary process that is reaching an extreme in our time. The more of nature that we convert into products, into commodities, the more that we domesticate the wild, the more that we have progressed. We have a money system that contributes to that movement, growth, and money being created through interest-bearing debt.
Debt compounds at a growth rate that does not occur in nature. Everything in nature grows according to the golden ratio. Satan's ratio is debt compounding.
In the wake of World War II, The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were established primarily to help Europe and Japan rebuild. Soon after, their focus shifted to making large loans to help developing nations. But as debt compounded, 32 out of 48 of these already poor economies dropped by 15% GDP. Bangladesh cut down 45% of their pristine mangrove forests as the IMF demanded shrimp harvesting, not to feed the people, but to export cheap seafood to the West. Child labor and generational debt traps have captured these cultures who overpopulate areas that depend upon imported food to survive. Jamaica borrowed $18.5 billion, paid back $19.8 billion, yet because of compounding debt, they still owe $7.8 billion. In the same period, the Philippines borrowed $110 billion, paid back $125 billion, and still owes $45 billion. The debt is periodically rolled over with new conditions like cutting jobs and wages until entire populations are drowning in debt. A bookkeeping sleight of hand that forces the poor to export their natural wealth.
You cannot understand the history of slavery in this country unless it actually includes the history of how the central banks funded the transatlantic slave trade.
Which central banks?
Bank of Amsterdam, Bank of England, same banks that funded the Federal Reserve. The Dutch East India Company, they take this loan money that was created out of nothing, out of bookkeeping entries, and they take real humans across the Atlantic to take real wealth, real natural resources from the ground, from the earth, in order to distribute wealth back up to the banking class. Debt is how you get everything for absolutely nothing. Debt is what forces us to liquidate the environment. Debt is what forces these Indians in the rainforests to cut down their own home and their own subsistence.
Since the 1970s, we have added more debt to our economies every single year than we've grown our economies. Every single year, our debt goes up more than our growth. And so over time, we now, as a global culture, have 350% of our GDP in debt.
From 1946 to the financial crisis of 2008, household debt went from 15 to 100% of GDP, and the debt crisis has only gotten more severe.
We're at this world tipping point right now. Since 2020, the Federal Reserve has taken the balance sheet from $4 trillion to $9 trillion. Our national debt went from 20 trillion to 30 trillion as we pumped money into the system. And so the 2020s are going to be one of the more volatile, crazy times that we've ever experienced, because we are in the midst of going from a growth economy into a debt economy.
As soon as the economy stops growing, then investment freezes up, lending freezes up, money no longer is created, and debt rises to unpayable levels. I mean, we're seeing that. Really, the current crisis is a long-standing crisis of growth, where economic growth has declined decade after decade for my entire lifetime.
The doomsday clock was created to symbolize how close we were to nuclear catastrophe during the Cold War. But decades after that threat subsided, the clock is still ticking.
The war has transformed the face of the globe forever. And in the decades ahead, the world will undergo another transformation.
In 2008 and 9, we had a too big to fail situation. In 2020 something, we're going to have a too big to save situation. All the other central banks of the world together won't be able to bail that situation out. And then we have a repeat of the 1930s sort of thing. Because all the money we have, all the stocks, bonds, pension funds, money markets, cash in our pockets, all of it is a claim on energy. We do not have enough cheap, affordable energy at scale of the quality that our system depends to pay back all those financial claims. And that will first manifest in the financial system as kind of a musical chair situation, and we will not do anything probably as a society to change this dynamic until we're forced to.
I do think that we're facing some kind of reset. There could be a few years of real hardship and dislocation for the people in this country that has not been experienced since the 1930s, and might even exceed that. Because our current money system is very much like a game of musical chairs. Anytime $1 million is created, 1.1 million or 1.5 million or whatever of debt is created. There's always more debt than money. One of the main motivations of our current economic system and economic thinking is a view of human nature that says human beings seek to maximize rational self-interest. So we're always in competition with each other for never enough.
The big secret is, of course, oil, which has brought a better life to all the people in the USA. But the key to making oil work for everybody is competition.
What we accept as human nature is in large part a consequence of the system that we are in. To illustrate that, consider a game of musical chairs.
In musical chairs, everyone starts with a chair. The music plays for a bit, you get up and dance around, then the music stops unexpectedly, to the players at least. Everyone goes for a chair only to find that there aren't enough. Someone loses. The more the music cycles on and off again, the results only head in one direction. Fewer chairs, fewer winners, and increasingly more people out of the game. Thank God it's just a game, right?
Let's make it even more interesting. Let's say not only do you not get a chair, but you lose your house, and your child doesn't get medical care, and you don't have enough to eat, okay? You set up the game like that, and what are you gonna see? You're gonna see people shoving and elbowing, and the strongest and the quickest and the luckiest are gonna get the chairs, and everybody else isn't. By and large, you're gonna see the competition that you expect. But is that because of this horrible human nature, or is that because of the rules of the game?
We face a date in the not too distant future of a cessation of economic growth and a contraction in the size and scale of the human enterprise.
Will central banks be able to keep our first world standard of living with financial wizardry, even in a world with diminishing returns on the energy that fueled the 200-year economic boom we've all enjoyed? It's been said that without energy to run our technology, it becomes a statue. Without energy for our cities, they become museums.
Humans combine energy and materials to create technology. And the more technology we have, the more complexity we add to the system. All of this complexity requires more and more energy every year. At some point, in the not too distant future, we're going to have less energy every year. And when that happens, what will technology be able to do for us? What will money mean at that point? How we respond to that as individuals, as a culture, will be the story of our time.
This is a global pandemic.
The hospitals look like a war zone.
Ukraine is under attack.
Against the Russian onslaught.
The largest U.S. fuel pipeline is now the victim of a ransomware attack.
Collapse of the financial sector.
This is a big deal.
The blind, hungry superorganism is not exactly a dead instrument. And it's not exactly alive either. Like money, This organism needs humans to behave. But a human body dies without microbes. We have 100 times more microbial DNA in our bodies than human, yet we can't live without them. We call ourselves sovereign thinkers, yet the microbes in us largely give us our appetite. We don't feed our body directly. We feed the microbes, and in turn, they feed us. Body economics. The market economy cannot eat money without us to move and exchange it. It isn't a sovereign thinker because we tell it what to consume. The natural order of both the human and superorganism are decentralized and distributed throughout the ecosystem.
We tend to assign sentience to something that's living, would be more like something that's actually going to actively avoid things that could hurt it and actively pursue food to feed it and continue its self-organization over time. And an economy is very much like that. You have an ecology composed of organisms. An economy is composed of organizations. And these are those groupings of people coming together under a common purpose.
At first blush, hearing that we're part of an energy-hungry superorganism is a little depressing because it removes some of our personal agency. Oh my God, this thing is happening. It's also a little liberating to understand the game board that we are a part of.
This was the creature that was born at the dawn of agriculture, took what it needed, grew rapidly, blindly, and did the bidding of the game we created. And now, winter is here, and the skeletons hiding in this game we've been playing are waking up.
The Prime Minister of France said that French citizens have to undergo energy sobriety. That moment is not too far away for the United States. Could be 10 years, could be 10 months, but it's coming. Humans will have to use less energy and material stuff. Less refrigeration, less lighting, less transportation, less imported food from New Zealand. We're not going to choose to do that. It is going to be foisted upon us from the financial system. One of these next financial crises, we won't be able to bail ourselves out because we can print money, we cannot print energy. In effect, what we're doing is we're turning billions of barrels of ancient sunlight into microliters of dopamine with nothing to show for it. There's this cultural carrot that pulls us forward in advertising and media that says, look at these people, how happy and healthy they are on this vacation in Cancun. And what ends up happening is the neurotransmitter response, the wanting of something, is stronger than the having of it.
It's our fault. We have expanded the global reserve currency in ways that are unthinkable. If we stay on this path, we're going to cause global famines.
Even a gradual decline in oil availability can dramatically slow down global supply chains. When central banks can no longer use debt as a magic wand to keep them going, 1 in 6 people in the world who rely on these supply chains to import food could face famine. That's over 1.3 billion people.
Poverty and hunger lead to demonstrations and violence in the streets.
The Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN already noticed food insecurity increase by 50% in most countries around the world, even before COVID-19 exacerbated the problem. And while most people feel this scenario will never come to pass, understand that we've never had 8 billion people hooked on a money game that provides so much security to a population with little awareness of how fragile the whole infrastructure is. The monetary system may only be seconds away from midnight.
If you think about the monetary system like a life, all living things have a beginning, middle, and end. And the monetary system is no different.
You can't taper a Ponzi scheme. You can't slow down the system without the system completely stopping and collapsing. You have to change the system. And that's the point we're at in history right now. We've seen monetary systems break before. Ancient Rome, that's the best example we have of this. And then, I mean, we're headed for a new dark ages. We're headed for insane period of monetary instability. The Federal Reserve is the one issue that should reunite the left and the right. The problem is that the people aren't paying attention to the central banks. And that's the only reason the central banks are a problem, is just because people don't want to look up the Fed.
A major campaign slogan of the 2024 election will be, end the Fed. End the Fed.
If we looked at the origin of the central bank, that it was an organization created to augment the portability shortcomings of gold. If we had been able to move gold at the speed of light, the central bank would have never emerged. You would never have this huge centralization, because if it's massless, it's information. You could just custody it yourself. It's trivial.
The Fed is meant to be an independent organization. The Fed is completely political.
Obviously, today, the Fed has become very much a political instrument, and it's no longer faithfully serving that function. But one of the meta patterns of our civilization, one of the motifs, is the war against the symptom, mistaking symptom for cause. And so we have an endless war against one symptom after another, one enemy after another, after another. Another motif is related. It's find the bad guy, find the enemy, find the one thing upon which you can blame all of your problems. Whether it's an atmospheric gas to explain all environmental degradation, or a geopolitical bad guy to explain all of our problems, or a virus to explain all of our ill health, or the Federal Reserve to explain all of our economic malaise. It's really attractive to think in that way, because once there's a single bad guy, then the solution is easy. You know, you just remove that bad guy. You go to war against that bad guy. Well, guess what? The Fed is part of a much larger system, and its creation actually has some very reasonable motives.
To harness the ingenuity of its people.
In a well-functioning system, what the Federal Reserve is supposed to be is an organ of the economic body of the society. It's very much like a heart. The heart is a receiving organ. The heart listens to the blood as it comes in and sends signals to the rest of the body, to the other organs and glands. Maybe more fluid is needed, maybe more of this electrolyte and less of that electrolyte. So it's not only a receiving organ that is at the center of flow, but it is also a listening organ. And that's what the Fed is supposed to be. Originally, the idea, and maybe it was always an ideal and not an idea, but there's an ideal there, which is that the Fed listens to the pulse of the economy.
When money threatens to get too scarce, Federal Reserve authorities act to make more reserve dollars available. When money threatens to get too plentiful, they act to make less reserve dollars available.
I think money would be the lifeblood.
All living things have a beginning, middle, and end.
If the Federal Reserve is the heart and was created to be the neutral referee, but is compromised by this left-right game, then many are saying we need a transplant. And in the course of human events, perhaps it has once again become necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. But that other is the central banking system. Not specific people or institutions, but the idea that central authority is necessary or even beneficial. And around the world, central banks are pilot testing their vision of the future of money as a purely digital and even more powerful instrument for controlling human behavior.
Where the central banks want to take it, I believe, is into a central bank digital currency. One currency for all. Why? Well, think about this. If we're all stuck using a digital currency, now we can have negative interest rates anytime we need, because I'll just take it out of your account. What are you going to do?
Negative interest rates with a CBDC gives the central bank the option to charge you interest for storing your digital money, which requires no warehousing. That fee is for whatever the central authority chooses to fund. P.S. If this becomes the new game of money, you can't opt out. There is no other bank to choose from.
There's a commercial banking system around the central bank today that is a distribution of that power, right? It's somewhat a resistance against this total central control and issuance of currency. Let's just say there's more autonomy for network participants in the current model, given that there's a commercial banking system surrounding the central bank. The central bank digital currency proposes that we remove that layer and that individuals just have an account with the central bank that we centrally monitor, control, determine what you can spend it on, when you can spend it. You move directly into the Chinese social credit scoring model. That's exactly, so it's just fiat on steroids, if you will.
Historically, money is a freedom technology, giving humans more optionality in any moment or circumstance, and is the most accepted, recognized, and desired exchange medium in most places amongst most people. Money gives us the freedom to craft our own experiences in life, and it sounds like a CBDC is a control technology in the hands of a small group of humans we'll likely never meet, who can change the rules of the game at any time to suit their whims rather than the collective's freedom to choose. So how might this technology of control operate in the near future, if it comes to pass?
10, 15 years from now, you go to the gas station to buy gas. Transaction denied. You've used your level of energy this month. You want to get a bottle of wine. Transaction denied. You've consumed more than your level of alcohol. You want to go buy a McDonald's cheeseburger. Transaction denied. You've overreached your level of calories.
It's a way to control us socially, economically, shut down dissent. They can turn off your bank account if they don't like what you're saying. They can control how much meat you want to eat. They can control whether you buy toothpaste or toilet paper. If this is implemented, it's a slave system, the ultimate slave system. It's a prison planet.
So, I've never been in a proper slave system before. How do I make a suggestion if I think the system is getting unfair? Hello? I'd like to make a suggestion for how the new game of money should go.
We're sorry. If you'd like to make a call, the number you have called. If you need help, hang up. Please hang up.
Is no longer in service.
Your call cannot be completed. Hang up.
No one is available. We're sorry. All circuits are busy. Please
hang up. Sorry.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Social credit, when it is used as an instrument of government control, can lead directly to a suffocating totalitarianism that the world has never seen before. In the absence of central control, I mean, really, it's about reputation. It's about your behavior toward others being visible to the whole society.
If social credit and CBDCs are built for transparency, shouldn't the Federal Reserve be just as transparent?
The US dollar is an SQL database maintained on-premise at the Federal Reserve. That's all it is, just a database. We don't know how many dollars are in circulation. We don't know who profits from their production. We don't know how many they will put into production. We don't know the criteria by which they are deciding. We don't know the shareholders of the central bank. Central banking is as clear as mud and twice as dirty. If you start looking at the interrelations of its institutions, it's purposefully opaque, let's say.
The president of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank, Neil Kashkari, expressed his own concerns about central bank digital currencies solving no problems that Venmo doesn't already. CBDCs allow the Fed to monitor every transaction, impose negative interest rates, and it would allow them to directly tax customer accounts based upon social media behavior. If you think penalties can only take the form of fees and taxes, consider what's happening in Europe with their energy crisis.
We're seeing the signs of what's coming with the central bank digital currency and the things we should be very concerned about. In Europe, places in Europe right now, if you heat your home above 19 degrees this winter, you could go to jail.
Because of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, there are natural gas shortages in Europe and the prices are very high, and they're worried about the winter. So they're recommending that everyone use 10% less energy, turning their lights off, driving slower. They are not allowed to have advertising signs after 9 p.m. at night, all kinds of little things like that, because the crisis is upon them. That moment is not too far away for the United States.
114 countries with over 95% of global GDP are considering a central bank digital currency. 20 countries are pilot testing CBDCs starting in 2023 alone. Globalist organizations like the World Economic Forum are calling for the Great Reset of the entire game of money, using COVID-19 as their opportunity and employing words like inclusivity and sustainable. They're asking for cooperation from all sectors and all countries to bend the knee to the one ring of centralized power. A lot of rumors and skepticism revolve around this group because they are mostly the winners of the musical chairs game that led us to a world where 20 people at the top have more than the bottom 3.5 billion. No mystery why trust has become an issue. But seen another way, they're simply declaring what rules they believe the next game should apply, because they, like everyone else, are calling the old game officially over.
Nixon closed the gold window in 1971. Guess when the World Economic Forum was created? 1971. And the idea of the World Economic Forum was that we can shift everything to corporations. And if we have a fiat currency that we can expand and expand and expand, well, we can expand this globalism. Politically, you're going to see the exact same changes that you saw through the Great Depression. In order to get out of the Great Depression, the biggest move was to reset the value of the dollar. Not at $20 per gold, let's make it 36. That reset or restructured the value of the dollar, and those restructurings take place over time, gradually, or at one time.
The Great Reset is a euphemism for a debt crisis that's going to redistribute more wealth away from the 99% to the 0.01%.
We're sorry.
Hang up.
We're starting over, it's fresh. It's like, no, you don't own anything now. You don't have a house now, you just rent everything. You rent they make us rent our own bodies with these biometrics if they could. This isn't a reset, it's just more debt slavery. And I'm scared.
Our society is stressed and polarized and entitled and addicted and worried about the future. And we have a lot of things that are in the news that give us anxiety. What's happening in Russia and Ukraine, the economic woes, the fact that the job market is getting worse. There's inflation. Climate change is on a lot of people's minds. These are all symptoms of an underlying phenomenon downstream of this energy-hungry superorganism that is pulling stuff out of the ground, transforming it into goods and services, giving us neurotransmitters. And the challenge is not to blame this country or this company or this social demographic for what's happening. Our real challenge is how are we going to, in coming decades, approximate the same emotional states of our ancestors with less energy and material and ecological damage. That's at the core of everything we're talking about.
So, do we keep pointing out enemies, or do we drive towards a solution that we have agency over?
Things are not going to get permanently worse. We might have less stuff. We might live in smaller houses. The trend toward McMansions might reverse. We might live in more community. But our lives will get better. Everything that we need to live in a beautiful way is available to us. So please don't be afraid of the collapse, of the Great Reset. Yes, be afraid of the Great Reset that would be imposed upon us by elites that are disconnected from human life and from nature and want to further totalitarian technocratic control over every aspect of life, to measure everything, to surveil everything, to track everything. That is a choice at this crossroads. But don't give them more power than they actually have. They cannot impose this upon us by force. The power is with the people. And when we recognize that, we will have a way to choose a different path.
It seems to me like the most important mega political variable is technology. The agricultural age gives way to the industrial age. These are in regards to the technological realities governing that paradigm. Prior to agriculture was the hunter and gatherer phase, where we hadn't even organized ourselves sufficiently enough to settle down. I would say we're definitely into the digital age at this point. There are objective properties that people using money desire. In this universe, prior to the invention of Bitcoin, the only things that humans knew of that were absolutely scarce were time and energy. We could not create any more of them. And that's why we engage in the market process, so we can make best use of them. This is the game we are playing. Bitcoin is the man-made creation of absolute scarcity. It's a discovery as fundamental as fire or electricity. A monetary technology that perfectly maps onto these primordial substances it is intended to represent or emblematize in the marketplace. It's overwhelming to even talk about it in a way.
Bitcoin versus gold, how does that all play out? The main difference that I see between Bitcoin and gold, by the way, exact same story, exact same reasons to want to own it. Everything we're talking about is why I want to own Bitcoin, okay? But there's one major difference. My Bitcoin needs to be stored in an exchange. It needs electricity. There's other things that can stop me from having that Bitcoin. If I hold this gold, everything can go out. The lights can go out. The energy can go out. I still got this gold. Gold will be here 100 years from now. I don't know, will Bitcoin?
The US government and the Federal Reserve Bank already began applying pressure to commercial banks to refuse crypto exchanges, simultaneously developing their own nearly identical technology, only with less transparency. Perhaps a central authority keeps us immature masses safe from ourselves. But how will humanity ever mature without the freedom to make our own technologies and exchange freely?
The ideal money would have been, massless gold, or this inviolable spreadsheet in the sky, something like that, where it's just like, I own this much, you own that much, we consensually agree to trade for money and goods or services. You get to these properties of money that people pursue, and you see why gold was selected. You see where gold had shortcomings in terms of its portability. We introduce currency. Currency is a great augmentation to portability, but it introduces counterparty risk that leads us from gold-backed currency to fiat currency. We have counterparty risk. We have people that debase currency into worthlessness. So that like perfectly explains that whole history, and then also explains the solution to the whole fucking problem, which is this discovery or this invention of Satoshi, in all his brilliance, that he's perfected the properties of money.
Satoshi Nakamoto is a mystery. It's unknown whether it's a person or a pseudonym for who or what devised Bitcoin and the first blockchain database. Perhaps it's best we don't know who Satoshi is. Maybe history will turn it into mythology as the one who changed the game, anonymously, if in fact decentralization becomes the new game. But Satoshi stood on the shoulders of giants. The collective and all our ancestors built this system and all its inner workings, flaws, and frailties because the fundamental human spirit is to witness, learn, evolve, and free ourselves from mental slavery. Instead of central authority, blockchain technology gives everyone transparency, security, and surrenders the referee's position from humans to the technology itself. Each link in the blockchain is verified not by a central database, but distributed across the network as the digital ecosystem governs itself. Money merges with the internet, just like a CBDC, but without the CB. The intelligence of the natural kingdom works in this way as a dynamic system seeking homeostasis. And to maintain this balance, every now and then, Team Yin has to check Team Yang.
I've heard stories about capoeira being used as direct action. Actually, people leading marches with beating bows, actually playing capoeira in front of bulldozers. It's been working really well for direct action for me. My friends see me out there doing this in front of the Fed, and a lot of them want to come train with me just because they see me training, and they don't even really know anything about the Fed or the NEAT Act, but they learn more about it just by coming out there. Martial arts are all about using your enemy's strengths against them. It's all about taking out a larger opponent, using their own momentum and force and strength against them. I mean, so monetary reform for me is just a martial art.
Harrison once said debt is death. He also balanced that statement.
What I learned from it was invaluable. I don't regret it. I'd be dead without the debt. I mean, I would have killed myself just like all my siblings had I not taken the debt and gotten out of that situation.
Perhaps the instrument of debt wasn't a useless scam only to benefit the few. And perhaps the Fed isn't an enemy, but an organ that simply needs removed. House of Representatives member Tom Emmer proposed the CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act to limit the Fed's power if a CBDC becomes the new monetary normal. But perhaps even that is too little, too late. The NEAT Act was proposed by Dennis Kucinich during Occupy Wall Street. It calls to dismantle the Fed and let the U.S. Treasury create debt-free money.
The Fed is where we should have been occupying. The NEAT Act should have been our demand. And the other thing that I've really learned from Occupy and from subsequent cannabis legalization is that calling your representatives is even more important than voting.
One of the biggest things I think we need to change is the fact that our money is printed by central banks with a corresponding debt. We don't need that. We can nationalize that bank and we can issue currency that's not backed by debt. It just needs to be issued by the U.S. Treasury, and we the people need to control our own currency.
Whether seeds and cattle, circuits and wires, Bitcoin or gold, no matter where you look, no matter your preference, the game that started 10,000 years ago is going digital. And perhaps this one time, you should remember your power, commandeer this superorganism, call your representatives, use your voice, create art, build community, and brace for impact for whatever comes next. Because whatever comes next is now here.
The more that we can build social networks and social bonds now, before some crisis arrives, I think the better the outcomes will be. We have to remember that after basic needs are met, the best things in life are free.
We have to stop giving away our will in the search of money and realizing that the best thing we can do is invest in ourselves. It's not about how much money you have in your bank account, but it's the product of what you're generating with that is real wealth. Publications like Forbes spends lots of resources trying to figure out how much wealth has somebody amassed, but not what they do with it.
The indigenous pipeline protesters, Me Too, Extinction Rebellion, Occupy Wall Street never ended. This is the benefit of Occupy Wall Street. It's Planet Occupy now.
We can reclaim a lot of life from the realm of money. And that means that we could have economic degrowth, even as we have more and more of the things that cannot be measured, that cannot be monetized. And maybe we want more and more of those things, which isn't to say that we'll abolish money, but it's to say the realm of money, the domain of money, maybe it's time for that to shrink a little bit.
Well, we've come now to the end of this saga. The money game and the future of humanity are now in your hands. I think. Hey, why'd the music stop?
I can conceive of a national destiny which meets the responsibilities of today and measures up to the possibilities of tomorrow. Behold a republic resting securely upon the mountain of eternal truth. A republic applying in practice and proclaiming to the world the self-evident proposition that all men are created equal, that they're endowed with inalienable rights, that governments are instituted among men to secure these rights, and that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Behold a republic in which civil and religious liberty stimulate all to earnest endeavor, and in which the law restrains every hand uplifted for a neighbor's injury. A republic in which every citizen is a sovereign, but in which no one cares to wear a crown. Behold a republic standing erect while empires all around are bowed beneath the weight of their own armaments. A republic whose flag is love, while other flags are only fear. Behold a republic increasing in population, in wealth, in strength, and in influence, solving the problems of civilization and hastening the coming of a universal brotherhood. A republic which shakes thrones and dissolves aristocracies by its silent example and gives light and inspiration to those who sit in darkness. Behold a republic gradually but surely becoming a supreme moral factor in the world's progress and the accepted arbiter of the world's disputes. A republic whose history, like the path of the just, is as the shining light that shineth more and more unto the perfect day.